Hey YouTube, it's beginning of April and getting to be about time for planting a garden and so on, and I decided to take a little break from my crawler project because I had gotten this old rototiller about 2 years ago, the summer of 2012, and my buddy and I have been using this since then for our gardens, and I help another friend out rototilling his garden. So I got to noticing after I bought this thing that the crankshaft had a little bit of slop in it, not only in play, but I could actually move it up and down a little bit. So I figured that I'd probably better take a break and tear this thing apart and make sure that everything's alright, and get the crankshaft tightened up. So I was just gonna share this, I guess. This thing has Timken style bearings on the crank. That's not very normal for most engines, but this is an old Wisconsin AENL model, and the guy told me when I bought it that it was probably built in 1962, so it's 52 years old. So I don't think it's doing too bad for its age. But I took these two bearings here off and replaced them with these new ones, and also the races in the block too. This thing had two different style bearings in it. I don't know if Ariens, when they built it and put their own thing on the back, used different bearings or whatever, but it had a Bauer brand bearing and race in the back end, and then in the front end it had a Timken bearing and race. And they're the same exact bearing, other than different maker. So in any case, I replaced them because they had a little bit of pitting and so on in them from old age. They got moisture, and they were a trick to get off. This one right here, the shoulder of the bearing, like this right here, is the same diameter as the shoulder of this gear for the timing. So what I did is I cut the bearing and got all the needles out and everything, and took a little Dremel grinder with a disc and cut a slot clear down until I almost broke through to the shaft, and then I got in here with a chisel with this thing supported on a block and hit it until it split the ring, so that it would, the press fit would be loose and I could slide it off. So in any case, I got those off, got these races pressed in. I pressed this race in on this end cap where the shaft comes out the back of the engine, and I got a new race in it and a new seal. And I noticed here on this with the design, they have this race, but there's nothing backing it when you take the sheet metal cover off. I don't know, maybe that is what went wrong when the previous person that had it apart did it. But it had end play. It had a lot of end play. I could feel it, and you could see it moving the shaft. So if you could visually see it, that's not good with these engines, at least. My book says that it's supposed to have 2 to 5 thousandths, well, actually 2 to 4 thousandths worth of end play. And here's a picture of what the rototiller looks like. That's pretty much what it looks like. This is a different model. This is a wider one. There's a 20-inch wide one, and there's a 28. And mine's a 20 with a smaller engine on it, a single cylinder. This one right here that's shown is a twin cylinder. It's either TE or TF model Wisconsin twin cylinder on it. And these things are quite the tank. They even offered with this back then a blade that you could mount on the front of the thing to push dirt or whatever with. So this thing, it's no little toy. So what I figured, being at this right here is only backed up by this right here, I would leave it stick out a little bit and draw it into place with the bolts that hold this cover on with the seal in it. And that way there would be no chance that it could walk back that way further and end up with more play. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, now I got all these tight. I went in the crisscross pattern to get these tightened down, and that should have pushed the bearing cup down that way, or race, whichever you want to call it. So it'll be seated against this plate, so it can't go any further that way. And now I'll be able to put the crank in. Alright, well, I got this thing turned over, and I got it set up on blocks so that the crankshaft can stick out through the bottom side. And now I'm going to stick it together, or stick the crank in it. Now this right here has the crank. There's a mark on the tooth here, and then down in the camshaft gear there is 2 marks in the center of one of the teeth on there, and you have to get those lined up. And when you put it together, so that the valves open and close at the right time, and also the sparks at the right time, because the magneto here runs off of the cam gear, and the cam gear runs off the crank, so they all have to be together, or in the right timing to each other, so that everything happens at the right time. So here, I'm going to sit this down in. Alright, now that's down in there. Now I'm going to get the connecting rod lined up. I should have probably taken the head off and so on, but I figured if I could, I'd save the gasket in case I needed it later, if I needed to take the head off or something. Last year I had to replace the head on this. The year that, or maybe it might have been the year before. The head gasket blew out, and I had also gotten a crack in the head, and I imagine the head gasket probably blew because of the crack. I'm not totally sure why, but maybe, I don't know. It's hard to tell. These particular engines here, they have a Babbitt bearing in the connecting rod. The connecting rod's cast iron, and they actually have Babbitt in there, like some of the older engines had, where the Babbitt's molded in, and they actually have shims, so that if you get a little bit of play in your connecting rod, rather than replacing the connecting rod, you can just take the shim out and get it back down to where it's within the tolerance of the amount of clearance that's in there. So I'm going to put it back together with these shims in here, and when I get everything right, I'll test, or I'll check the slop in it and see what I need to do with it, whether it's good, or whether I need to take the shims out and to adjust it, or whatever the case may be. Okay, now I got the connecting rod bolted on, so that or just temporarily, so that it won't be loose. And now I'm going to put this end cap on with these shims and gaskets. They call out for this thing to have 2 to 4 thousandths worth of clearance, end play. So if you put an indicator on the end here and try to move it up and down, the needle will only move between 2 and 4 thousandths. They give you a whole stack of shims that are made out of gasket material that come with the gasket kit, and you have to arrange them all, put them all on here, and then put it together and see what kind of end play you got, and then you take out as many as you need until you get it down to where it should be, so that it's not too tight and it's not too loose. I think that's where probably the person prior to me that had this or worked on this probably went wrong. They probably just threw the whole stack in and said, okay, it'll be good enough, and put it together, and the thing knocked. It had a knock to it. Didn't sound horrible. It sounded okay running, but it just didn't sound quite right. So I decided to take it apart for that reason, and I'm glad I did. The guy that sold me the kit and so on for the pieces for this said, "Oh, that's not good," and I decided I'd probably better take it apart. Alright, now I was getting ready to put this on, and it says top on here too. It's completely symmetrical. I don't imagine that it would be a huge deal, but it says top, so. Okay, well, here I did some fiddling around with my shims and so on, and got it close, and got my indicator set up on here, and you'd be surprised how hard it is to get this little indicator to be able to be seen on the camera. I got a couple lights ahead of me, and there was quite a few different times here this thing all you could see was white from the glare of the lights reflecting off the lens on here. But in any case, my end play now is right about 5 thousandths here. If each of these numbers is by 5, and the markings in between, it has they're marked by half thousandths a piece. So it's going just not quite 5, about 4.5 when I push it up and down, the crankshaft up and down. So I'm really close. They call for like 2 to 4 in the book, I believe. So I'm going to take it out and take one of these gaskets out of here and replace it with a thinner one. The rebuild kit gives you 2 different thickness of gaskets. These ones right here are 7 thick, and then they give you these other ones here that are 3 thick. So you shuffle around whichever order you need to get the right end play. So I take my indicator back off and swap out a 7 for a 3. Alright, well, you gotta love it when you run out of memory on your camera. Okay, so I got the 7 switched out and a 3 in place, and it looks like now I got about somewhere around 2 thousandths, just right about there. So I'm on the low side of the tolerance that they call out for the end play. So that'll be good. So now I'll move on to the connecting rod. Should be all set here. Okay, so I'm about ready to check my connecting rod clearance between where the connecting rod connects on the crankshaft. So first of all, I checked the indicator on the connecting rod and checked to make sure that that I wasn't moving it up and down any. And then I moved off to the side and put the indicator on the crankshaft itself, with the crankshaft halfway in the middle of the stroke of the cylinder. And I've come to find here with this that I'm getting right about 4 thousandths worth of play. So that means the hole in my connecting rod is 4 thousandths bigger in diameter than the journal on the crankshaft that it's riding on. And my book calls out for it to be between 1.5 and 2 thousandths worth of clearance. So I'm 2 thousandths over on clearance. And this thing had the shims in it on the connecting rod, so you can take them out and reduce the clearance if you need to. That's not so common on new engines today, but old engines years ago, they used to do that, especially with the Babbitt bearings in the old engines. But nowadays they use inserted bearings, so they just replace them and regrind the crank and so on if need be to get things back where they should be. But back then it was kind of more designed to be dealt with in a field without very many tools. So things were a little bit more versatile back then. And you could do that. You just take some shims out and put it back together again, get it clearance back down where it should be, and run again without a bunch of hassle of ordering parts and all that. So in any case here, I'm going to take this off and take that out and see what I got for shims. I never did measure the shim when I had it apart last to see what I got to work with. And another thing you can use to check this clearance on the connecting rod is a stuff that's called plastic gauge. They're little plastic strips, and you can lay them in on the journal and put the cap on and tighten it down, and it'll crush the plastic. And then you take it back apart and you measure how wide the plastic crushed to, and there's a little chart that tells you how wide the plastic, measuring how wide the plastic is, what you have. So I don't have any of that, so I'm just using my indicator. Okay, so here's the shim. Look at that, it's 2000s. So by taking out my 2000 shim, and the other one ought to be 2000s also, it is. I'll be back within the range that I'm supposed to be with this. Okay, and make sure my marks are in the same side. You can't put these on backwards or you'll have problems. Because at least on this one, the bolts have a shoulder on them that align the cap to the rod, and if it's turned around, it'll align the rod or the cap to the bolts, but the bore will be offset, so that your hole will be like this. And you don't want that, so you gotta make sure you put it back together with the marks matching up. If it doesn't have marks on it, you put marks on it before you take it apart, so that it's obvious, because you get turned around really quick. And like I said before, I don't have any torque specs in my book, which was a surprise to me, so I'm just tightening these down for now, and I'll find out later what my torque specs are supposed to be and torque the nuts with a torque wrench to whatever determinant it's supposed to be. So, I'll get my indicator back on here. Let's see what she says. Alright, there's 2,000ths worth of clearance there. So that's what the book says that I'm supposed to have. So I'm all set, other than torquing the nuts down to whatever they're supposed to be. So got my crank all set up and the connecting rod all set up. Everything else about the engine seemed pretty good. It was a really nice running engine, so I'm not really going to mess with anything else other than I don't believe the timing is right, and I'm going to flip this over off camera and show what I mean. But I'm going to do a little studying in the book first. Okay, so this engine here has a magneto on it. That's not very common for any of the other engines, smaller engines, but Wisconsin used a magneto. And this one right here is a Fairbanks Morris. And what happens is when you turn the crank over slow, it'll it'll turn, and then when it's supposed to spark, it'll snap, and you'll hear it click, and it what it does is it fires retarded by 25 degrees when you start it up, and once it gets up to a certain RPM, which is way lower than idle, it'll stop firing retarded, and it'll actually fire 25 degrees in advance, according to what I understand from the book. So what it's supposed to do here is, according to the book, is when I turn the crank over, I should see it snap when this key is straight up and down, because this key is right in line with the crank being at top dead center. So this is at top. This is in the very top when the crank is at top dead center. And according to the book, it's supposed to snap when this key is straight up if I turn it slow enough. And we'll see what it does here. And you hear a definite click. And see, it's not straight up. This thing right here, ever since I've had the engine, and if you give it a swift pull, it would start up and it'd run fine. It ran really nice. But if you didn't give it a swift pull, if you pulled it just kind of normal, it would stop you cold or spin backwards a little bit and yank the cord out of your hand, and it would hurt when it pulled it out of your hand. So now I know for sure, and we didn't really run it a whole lot, so it fires right before there. So what I got to do is I got to take the mag off with these two bolts right here, and get the gear in the right tooth. The teeth aren't, or the gears aren't meshed in the right teeth. And what the book says that you should be able to do is turn this where it's straight up and down, and there's a little sight hole here with this screw, and you're supposed to be able to see on the tooth that's sticking, the tooth that's right in line with this hole. There's supposed to be a little X stamped on the top of the tooth showing. So I'm going to have to take this apart and fiddle it around and get it together where the tooth with the X showing, the X on it, is showing through this hole. And I had already looked through here, and it's not. It's off. I forget if it's one or two teeth. I'm thinking one. So I'm going to take it apart and do that. Alright, well, I moved the mag, so it's set up now where the X on the tooth shows in the hole when the key slot is straight up and down. So now I'll see what it looks like here. There, it clicks when it's almost straight up and down. So this thing ought to fire a lot better now. I ought to be able to just give it a nice gentle tug on the rope, and it ought to fire right off now. So that's pretty much it for here in the shop. I'm going to take it home and I'm going to scrub it all down and put a nice fresh coat of paint on it, and work on putting it back together. Well, actually, I got a piece on the clutch that was broke when I took it apart, I found, and I'm going to have to rebuild a couple of those little pieces, and then I'll get to put it back together again and move back onto my crawler.